Contrast paints have been a really big part of my miniature painting process since they were released, and so I was really lucky to have some of the new contrast paints and shades by Games Workshop to take a look at. There's a bunch of really bright colours here, as well as entirely new formulated shades. And what I want to do is take a quick look at some of them. So the first thing I tried was a few of the colours over a silver base coat. And you may have seen, if you've seen my Ultramarines videos, that I really like putting colours over silver. And some of them worked really well. I think this green looks really cool. And I think that the slightly darker blue works really well for Ultramarines. Some of them worked less well, like the Imperial Fists yellow and the red as well. It just didn't really have the effect that I was going for. It didn't go into the recesses as much as I think it should, and it didn't stain the colour correctly. So next I tried the same Imperial Fists yellow paint over a white base coat, and as you can see, I have done a little bit of shading here, but as you can see in the main, it looks much better. And I think that's really important for especially the new bright colours. You really need a really good bright undercoat. Speaking of undercoats, one thing that I realised when doing this is just how dark comparatively Greyseer and Wraithbone are. So we had Greyseer on and Wraithbone on the left here, and then we have the new White Scar primer on the right. They are actually much darker than the White Scar. So my next test will be over a White Scar undercoat, or at least a bright white undercoat, and I decided to paint these Eldar Corsairs from the Kill Team box. I think they're really cool models, and because there's 10 of them, they're going to have a good opportunity to test a bunch of the colours. Once my models were primed, and I started by picking out the brightest colours that I could for each shade in the Progress Pride flag. One thing that it's important with some of these is that the finished effect is quite different to the bottle colour, which does come up again later in a kind of annoying way. Once I picked the colours to best represent my Pride Rangers, I did one coat of each onto the models and then let it dry completely. If you are interested, the colours that I used were Baal Red, Magmadroth Orange, Imperial Fist, Karandras Green, Azurman Blue, Luxian Purple, Doomfire Magenta, Pilar Glacier, Black Legion, and Garak Sewers. The only issue I had with applying these colours was the Pilar Glacier. Perhaps I ought to have looked it up before, but there isn't loads to go off yet, and it turns out that this is a very thin colour, almost an icy white rather than a light blue, and it just looked like the model was from a different thing, rather than from the same material in a different colour, which was kind of what I was going for. Luckily, given that it was so thin, I could swap it out for Frostheart, which is a nice light blue. Not everyone has the paint sent to them though, and if you've bought Pilar Glacier after seeing it in the shop, you might be disappointed. Better documentation is really needed on the site at least. The other thing to note is that I thinned down Doomfire Magenta with contrast medium, as the colour is a really bright pink, whereas I needed a sort of more candy-like light pink. When all of the colours were dry, I noticed that not all of them had a massive amount of contrast. Some did, like the blues and greens and pinks, but the orange, yellow and red in particular are really quite flat. They're great base coats, but they don't provide the shading and highlights in one that other contrasts do. For most models, I therefore went in with some shades, either as a recess shade or as an all-over shade. I used a mix of the old and new shades here to get a feel for the new ones, and as you may have seen in my white armor video, the new formula is much less staining. It is a lot easier to do a recess shade, and if you make a mistake, you can wipe it away without leaving any colour behind. In contrast, the old shades leave behind colour on the surface even if you wipe it away immediately. Once the shades were dry, I did an edge highlight or dry brush on each model. Picking my edge highlight colour was actually quite tricky, and I'm not sure I made the right choice in every case. Because the contrast paint pulls away from the edges are often quite a bit lighter than the midtone already, and so finding a colour which isn't just white or bone to highlight with wasn't always easy. With the main colours done though, I did the rest of the details quite simply, and I painted the bases, and the set looks a bit like this. So my feelings on each of these colours are mixed, so I'm going to quickly run through each of them. If you found my experiments useful, please drop a like, make sure you're subscribed, and let me know which colour you're looking forward to the most. So orange is super flat contrast paint, but the orange shade added a lot of depth and I was able to edge highlight it really nicely. I used the Briar Witch contrast paint for the daggers, which is a really cool ghostly colour. Red, again really flat, but Caribou Crimson is a good shade, and then I used Wild Rider Red to highlight. This one was the one where I struggled to pick a highlight colour, as all of my reds seem too close, so its highlights aren't as pronounced as they maybe could be. The gold on all of these models is scale 75 Necro Gold, with Nuln Oil as a shade. The new Nuln Oil is really nice, but for all over these metallics I wonder if I prefer the old. I'm going to have to experiment. Dark blue. No notes, this is a great colour. The sword is striking scorpion green, which is a really nice yellowy green. It looks a lot like the way I paint my magic on my Nighthorn, so that could be a great time saver. Black. Black Legion is quite flat, but again, it's easily highlightable, and I think this looks great for like an Ulthuan Craft World scheme. Yellow. Imperial Fist and the new yellow shade work so nice. I ended up highlighting with Bone, as all of my yellow paints didn't look quite right. The sword is another really nice subtle tone. I think it might be the Glacier paint that failed on the armour. Brown. This is my least favourite. I think he looks too samey, which could be because I used the same quite brown tones for the rest of the details. I reckon if you specifically picked colours to go with the brown armour, it would look great. Light blue. I highlighted with Bone again and I think it looks great. The new lighter blue shade is an interesting shade colour, as it is quite light, not normally something you would want in a shade, but it adds a richness to this blue that I like, kind of like shading with the Talassar blue contrast paint. It could be great for shading Hallowed Knights or Grey Knights. Pink. Perfection, and I would do a whole army of this scheme if I could. The dragon scale cloaks are done with Croxigor scales, which is also a lovely colour. Purple. Again, a really nice colour. I can see Empress Children players using this a lot. It has a decent contrast effect as well and can be highlighted with light purples. Green. Not my favourite, but I think this is a nice colour. Salamanders or Orc skin would be a good fit for this, I think. It's always useful to have more green variety. And that's it. Thanks for watching this experiment video. If there's anything you'd like me to cover in more detail, please let me know, and I will see you in the next video.